Well, we're with David Ovens, Chair of Scottish Athletics this morning, and pleased to see you, David. You took over as Chair at the AGM in September. What are your initial thoughts about the sport and the national governing body?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So I took over in September, but I've obviously been involved and around the sport for almost 40 years now. So I've got good visibility of where the sport's at now and where it's come from. And I have to say, I think it's in a good place, notwithstanding all of the aspects of COVID, which I'm sure we'll come on to discuss. Obviously, the performance levels within the sport talk for themselves, and that's been a theme, I think, over the last certainly 5 years, and if not 10 years. But in relation to the governing body, clearly the pandemic was a challenging time for a new chair to come on board. But it wasn't just a new chair, because obviously we lost Mark Munro to UK athletics, I think at the very back end of 2020, and Stephen Maguire, our head of performance, went to Sport Ireland. And I think the great thing is that we were able to replace both of those roles from within the sport. So obviously Colin Hutchison coming on as chief executive, and then Mark Pollard as head of performance. But the pandemic was challenging, and if you sort of wind back to pre-pandemic times, if you can remember, Peter, that far back, we're also at that stage, we're in the very early stages of our strategy, building a culture of success, and that was obviously built around the 5 pillars of clubs, competition, performance, partnerships, and recreational running. And the sport at that time was in a good place. And we had membership of almost 14,000 at that point. But then COVID hit. It was a torrid period for everybody, but it was a tough time for the sport. And as you know, we had constantly evolving guidance, which the team, in the office had to keep on top of. They had to clarify, they had to challenge with Sport Scotland where appropriate, and then summarise that for the clubs. And then the clubs themselves had to do their best to keep the membership engaged, training as best they could. But at one point, the membership numbers dropped significantly.
Yeah, I think it was 9,700 in May at one point, and we're back up sort of, just over the 12,000. What do you think that says about how the membership feels and where the recovery has happened?
Yeah, so it was clearly a challenge for all corners of the sport, but it was a challenge that I think the clubs in all parts of the sport responded to really well. So, so during that period, we ran the virtual events, which can, never be a perfect replacement for the normal events, but they did maintain that sense of engagement for our members during the period. We ran the Keep On Running campaign, which I think hit the right note for recreational runners. That kept people motivated to participate. But I think as well, the team within Scottish Athletics communicated really well with the sport during that period to let them know what was happening, what we were trying to do to influence Sport Scotland or the government, for example. So there was a sense, I think, that the athletics community was engaged on the same page during that period. And then I think, looking back on 2021, despite all of those challenges, it's actually been a great year for the sport, against that backdrop. I went to the various track and field championships, the age group, the seniors, and the relay championships over the summer. The participation levels and the atmosphere there was just fantastic. So people were clearly keen to return to the sport. And then, of course, the performances that we saw in Tokyo by our Olympians and our Paralympians were just inspiring, and we made a huge contribution, obviously, to the Team GB medal tally there. So that was all great. And now, as we're recovering from that sort of COVID period, we're trying to reconnect as a sport, and we need to refocus on that, building a culture of success going forward.
Well, I remember that day at the club relays at Linwood, and I think it was actually a record number of teams, hundreds of teams entered, and as you say, a fantastic atmosphere. So, before we look towards 2022, the Eurocross, even over just this month, seemed a great way to end the year. There was a record contingent of 7 Scots involved in the GB team of 40 athletes, and of course there was that fantastic Eurocross gold at under 20 for Megan Keith.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to say is well done to Megan Keith and well done to Ross Cairns, her coach. I mean, it was an absolutely fantastic performance to watch. I mean, I think it was a great course, wasn't it? It was a super cross country course. The great organisation by the Irish there, but really great, as you say, to see the seven Scots, representing Team GB at that event. And again, I think you saw that sort of representation in the summer at the Olympics and at the IPC Paralympics, and it just shows the strength across the sports, not just in track and field, but across the cross country too. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I don't think we should minimise the impact or the efforts of all of those athletes if we take the point that they've all had to train through COVID and come through difficult times in terms of where their actual own progression, especially some of the younger ones. So 2022 does look very exciting, at this juncture. A Commonwealth Games year with Team Scotland involved is always something, to relish. But sort of on top of that, this year in 2022, we're going to have a World Championships and a European Championships as well. It's going to be an exciting time for our elite athletes, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be a really exciting time for the elite athletes. And obviously, as you said, it's going to be a busy period with the Worlds and the Europeans. But as chair of Scottish Athletics and as a Scot, I mean, I'm really excited by the Commonwealth Games. It's effectively a home Commonwealth Games in Birmingham next year, and athletes in Scotland don't often get that opportunity to represent Scotland with a Scottish best. I've got high hopes for what we can do in Birmingham. I think it's great news that we've got the 6 athletes pre-selected who did so well in the Olympics, and any one of those could be a medalist in Birmingham. And I think as well that the performance standards to qualify for the team in Birmingham are some pretty hard standards to meet. So I'm pretty confident that whoever's selected to run for Scotland in Birmingham is going to be a medal contender come July.
Just interesting then, David. I mean, there is quite often a debate about how much elite performances affect the grassroots. Where do you stand on that one?
Oh, I'm firmly in the camp, Peter, that they have a great influence on the next generation, and they help to inspire the next generation. I mean, I think if you look at Scottish athletics, we obviously sort of winding back to 2012 in London and then 2014 in Glasgow, we had some big home events there, and I don't think it's any coincidence that since then you've seen the sort of level and the depth of performance across athletics in Scotland really improving. So I think the two are inevitably linked. And then I'm obviously involved not just as chair of Scottish Athletics, but as a club coach as well. So at Fife, and seeing the likes of Owen Miller, who won the gold medal, Nicole Yergin, who's one of the Olympians, coming to Petrivi, to speak with the young athletes. There were crowds of them round about those athletes, and people are clearly excited to see those individuals, and they aspire to do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think anyone who was at Lanark for the Lindsay short course when we had 3 Olympians just out there competing in the field, Laura Muir, Andy Butchart and Jake Whiteman, would echo that. I know you're very keen, David, to build participation levels. Clubs will obviously be very important in that, and Jog Scotland groups. But do you have to look further afield, maybe partnerships with the Daily Mile, possibly with Park Run? Really, I assume with anyone who's similarly minded. Tell us your hopes in that area. Does it stem from communities?
Yeah, I think that summarises it well, people. I think strong and thriving communities with good local facilities underpin the sort of well-being of people who are in them. So at the grassroots level, I'm really keen that we do expand the number of participants in our sport. But in particular, I'm keen, and I know Colin is too, that we enable people who haven't been able to access sport before to take up athletics. So we've got a great club and a volunteer system in Scotland, but one of the areas of focus for Colin and I is around our facility strategy. So we're going to be publishing that strategy in early 2022, but what we're really keen to try and do is to unlock investment in new facilities across Scotland. So it's to make sure that there's a much greater focus on the role local communities can play in sustaining the sort of physical and mental well-being of the people who live in them.
Well, so finally, just can you perhaps sum up the role of Scottish Athletics as the governing body? Is it about making things happen? Facilitating is possibly the word that comes to the mind. Is that what it's really all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the sport in Scotland is not Scottish athletics. The sport is the coaches, the clubs, the volunteers, the officials, the mums, the dads, the teachers. That's what makes athletics in Scotland a brilliant and a thriving sport. The role of Scottish athletics is really to make sure that we can support all of those individuals, to make sure that the ecosystem's connected and moving in the same direction. Now, it clearly has been in the last 10 years, and I'm really keen as chair of Scottish Athletics that we continue to take that forward over the next 10 years and beyond.